Hi everyone, this is Xander Breach, and this is Before the Journey, My Early Childhood, Part 15. Before I continue, I must ask you to please watch parts 1 through 14. If you have not watched parts 1 through 14, stop this video right now and, watch them. If you start now, you're going to be lost, because I've gotten very far in the story. So please watch parts 1 through 14 before you watch this. Also, I would like to apologize for taking a long time in doing this part. But all in all, I appreciate everyone's patience, and I thank you for taking the time to have patience with me. So with that said, I would like to do a recap of part 14. Part 14, we're getting into we got into the end, the last, starting the last days of my stepdad. We got into the last things we did with him. The fishing trips, the movies. I mentioned going to see Batman and Robin with him. My mother would later like Poison Ivy. Getting into talking about seeing the first Star Wars movie. Then getting into talking about seeing Anaconda, where I learned, strangling someone can lead to death. And then also getting into talking about how keeping a tidy room is important when my mother took away mine and my brother's toys when we were kids. So now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into part 15. So I'm going to start right where I left off in part 14 with my stepdad getting worse. So my stepdad started getting worse to the point where he was getting sick. He was coughing a lot, and going fishing came to an end. Big events came to an end, and we ended up going to spend the night at my Mimi's house, his mother, and hanging out with my aunt, who lived with Mimi at the time. We did that a lot, and going to her house, where she was currently living at, we were watching Spanish shows, and I remember one of the Spanish shows that she played would come on at nighttime. It was a Spanish soap opera, and we'd sit there, or I'd sit there watching it with her, and she would translate the show in English for me. Trust me, this is not a show a child should be watching, but she was one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to learn Spanish. And a lot of times, my brother and I would go and spend time with her, and I'd be around her when she spoke Spanish with other Hispanic speakers. And considering she was bilingual, she would always translate in English with me, but I really didn't want to get into her business. But at the same time, her doing that made me want to learn Spanish. To this day, I still want to learn Spanish, but I have a little issue rolling my R's. So it was actually more than what I thought now that I think about it as an adult. So, yeah, we spent a lot of time with her. And then I think by this time, my mom and my stepdad wanted a lot of time alone. And that's probably why we were going out a lot. But it ended up being that when my stepdad got sick, I need to correct myself on a few things. They moved back in. Because when his symptoms started to get worse and worse, it was that point where she ended up moving back in with my aunt in tow. And he got to the point where the only movies we watched was basically anything on pay-per-view, anything on the movie channels. And he was spending a lot of time watching movies on pay-per-view, whether it be PG rated, PG-13, or R rated. We joined in sometimes, but we did keep our distance from him. It got to the point where, it's the summertime and just, he was not doing good at all. It also got to the point where I started looking at the man more as a father. No offense, I didn't have a lot of father figures in my life. I had father figures, but they were hardly in my life. And he jumped in and became somewhat of a father figure to me. And I remember calling him Dad after I found out him and my mother got married. Yeah. They got married by court. And it was only a month away, maybe a month or two away, before his health would gradually go downhill. But while he was starting to go downhill, or before he did, they got married. So things got worse and worse and worse for him. And it just got to the point where he was going to the hospital now. There was frequent hospital visits. My mom would come home, get him some clothes, back to the hospital. We hardly saw my mom, my brother and I. My aunt was babysitting my brother and I a lot. And, my Mimi would come and watch my brother and I. I mean, we were dealing with the whole babysitting phase frequently. My mother always going to the hospital. She was always by my stepdad's side. And I could remember it clear as day. During the times we got babysat, I remember my aunt mentioning that, the things that my mother wanted her to mention to us about why mom wasn't home all the time. And I guess my mom didn't want us worrying about a lot of things, and I didn't blame her for that. It got to the point where we hardly saw my stepdad anymore. And I remember one of the things my mother said before my stepdad went to the hospital. He told her, that he thanked her for letting him spend time with my brother, me, and his son. He got a chance to be a father figure to not just one kid, but to 3 different kids. And hearing that, it made me realize how much he appreciated all the time he had with us, and how being a father figure became important to him. I'd later learn with my stepbrother that he wasn't much of a father figure at first, but I think when my mom came into his life, she made him realize how important it is to be a father figure, and he brought my stepbrother over to spend the night every single weekend after that for a whole year, and he became the father figure my stepbrother needed and a new father figure to my brother and I. He really put on the father figure role well, and I think that's why we went on the fishing trips with him, why he got us involved a lot in the events, why We went to the movies a lot. He was always there because he was really wanting to make up and redeem himself. And I think a lot of people can get out of what my stepdad was doing is basically he was more of a redemption story. But we're about to get into the consequences now. And y'all, I've been warning y'all on this. My mother's and his consequences is now coming up. And trust me, you've been fairly warned. And, I'm not playing around, but it's time to go into the consequences. I want everyone who's watching this to pay real close attention because now it's time to throw in some lessons, and I'm not playing around. We're going to throw in some lessons of why my mother and my stepdad shouldn't have done the things they did in private. Because now the consequences are coming into play. So, not seeing my stepdad for a while became a frequent thing. But one day, my mother came home. And it was a pretty bad day for her. It was a pretty bad day for my Mimi, all of his loved ones. I went to my mom. She looks me dead in the face, and she tells me my stepdad passed away. And I'm like, looking at her, I'm like, what the? And how he passed away, he went to the bathroom. The strain from him using the bathroom made him collapse on the floor, and he passed away from that. It was the strain of taking a number 2. I'm sure you can figure out what the cause of death was, but due to privacy reasons, I cannot mention entirely what the death was. You wrap your brain around that one. My mother did say, I remember later down the line, she did say that one of the things she had to do before they can take my stepdad's body is she had to clean, in her own words, the shit off his ass. That was still there from him trying to take a number 2. She did mention how gross it was, but it had to be done. And I bet during that time she was flooded with tears when she had to do this. I mean, not everyone wants to clean their husband's feces when, when saying goodbye to them. But if she wanted something done, she had to do it. It was probably strict orders from the doctors and the nurses because no one wanted to touch that man. And you'll later learn why. So, it was already July of 97. I would say this is July 14th, 1997, the man passed away. And everybody was crying. It was a heart-wrenching moment for my mom especially because my stepdad actually became the love of her life. But you have to think, decisions that were made with him would later affect her life. But he got sick rapidly fast. I thought it would take time before he would have bite the dust, but no. I guess all in all, God wanted him sooner than I thought. But yeah, he bit the dust a lot sooner. I guess when your symptoms get rapidly fast, something happens. I just didn't think it would be from a strain of having to take a number 2 that a man that big would collapse on the floor and just die. Like that. Like quick. It was like fast. So eventually memorial arrangements were made, funeral arrangements were made, and I remember, I guess he got embalmed, and they put the body in a casket. My mother was devastated, grieving, if you will. I never seen my mother pour out so many tears since the passing of, I guess, either my grandma Morel or my great Nana Morel. Might I remind you, I said great grandmother, but I did mention last names. I'm just not going to mention first names due to privacy reasons. But I never seen that woman shed so many tears like that. My mother's heart was broken in half. And seeing the pain in her eyes, having to deal with the loss of my stepdad, was one of the worst things a young boy could ever see. My brother, my stepbrother, and myself all dressed in uniforms. Black uniform jacket, button-down white shirt, black pants, slacks if you will, and a black tie. We were all in uniforms. We saw family members of my stepdad's we haven't seen in a while, or met. We saw basically family members we already met, and it was a big memorial service. Huge memorial service, big funeral. We had the funeral at an actual church. My mother came up to sing Amazing Grace. Everything was tape recorded. If I had the footage, if I know you in person, I would have showed you the tape recorded footage, but I don't know where that's at. But there was a lot of tape recorded footage of my mother getting up to sing Amazing Grace. She sang that song the best she could, and it was hard for her because the woman was literally crying while she was singing that song. What I didn't know is that song would be one of the most precious memories I would later have of her as I become, a young teenager or an older teenager to young adult. It's still one of the most precious songs I've ever heard, because it would become later a gospel hymn that my mother would find peace from. But I'd rather get to that later. Let's get back to the subject. Grieving can take a toll on somebody. And in my mother's case, this was a heart-wrenching moment. That woman grieved so long, so hard for this man. And you think she would have moved on. I don't think her moving on was that easy for her. This man touched her heart in ways I can't explain. But he also did some damage that my mother would face the consequences for with her decisions. You see, if you haven't figured it out yet, I grew up around impurity. Yes, you heard it correctly. If you're a Christian, you know exactly what impurity is. And because of their impure ways, this is basically the start of the consequences. Now, God doesn't want people to go through pain like this, but when God's not in the middle of a relationship, things like this happen. I mean, I've already learned that too. But I'm just being real with you. Things like this happen. Somebody dies. Somebody gets, sick from, basically because of their decisions. And in my mother's case, what I didn't know is that was becoming the case. And it all started with my stepdad and this moment. This whole moment, what I didn't realize was the start of consequences for actions done by my mother. And what was going to happen was the suffering period. We were getting close to the suffering period. And looking back now, I think it was needed, but it was more so from my mother's actions. I had to ride along right with the suffering period as well. And that's what most of y'all need to understand. The decisions you make don't only affect you, it affects your family too. So I would really rethink some decisions you make before you make it. Because it'll affect your family and generations to come. So I would really get this through your head that this whole moment in this part right here is the start of that suffering period. So back to the story. So after my mother sang Amazing Grace, we all went to see my stepdad get buried. Unfortunately, we weren't there for very long, but my mother was. My mother said that she heard knocking on the coffin and something weird happened. I guess my stepdad came back to life or something. I don't know what happened. Saying, hello, 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 let me out. My mother was surprised. How could a man that just got embalmed come back from the dead like that? I'm still surprised to this day. I don't know what happened there, but I don't really think my stepdad wanted to be buried, and I guess my mother got the hint. So she had the man cremated, and she was the one who was going to keep his ashes with her. So that's what happened. The man got cremated. So we all went back to my stepdad and my mother's house. Excuse me for that error. And everyone watched old videotapes of my stepdad on his fishing trips he recorded. Just to go back down memory lane, we had a big lunch. I probably loaded up on a lot of beans. My stepbrothers like singing the beans are good for your heart song because I'm just eating beans like a maniac, I guess. It was funny. But yeah, we had a big meal that day. It was a good celebration of life for my stepdad. It got to the point where after the memorial service, my Mimi decided that it was time to pack up and go. And with her leaving, she said that she didn't want to stay there anymore because she could still see my stepdad by that garage where he used to do all the painting he did, on his boat, all the work he did on his boat, and she basically didn't want any part of that anymore. Do I blame her? No. So she ended up leaving, and ending with her leaving, so did the rest of the family of my stepdads. My stepbrother too. Every one of them left our lives that time. Ending what is now a chapter in our lives. With our stepdad's family and him gone, my mother would begin another journey, which we will get into with part 16. But the journey with my stepdad was a fun one. But what we didn't know is someone else was going to come into our lives. And that someone else was also the former friend of my stepdad's. And what we didn't know is that we were in for a rude awakening and a ride that we were never going to forget. For now, and I'm just going to preview in on part 16, this is the start where things are going to get a little more intense. Not too intense, but keep in mind, we're now getting to talking, in part 16, we're going to get into talking about my mother's ex-fiance. And this is now also the conclusion of 96 to 97. We're hitting 97 to 98 on the next part. So I end this by saying, y'all take care and God bless you.